So it's Labor Day weekend. Some civic holidays are harder to connect to Scripture than others. I'll tell you, Labor Day, I think, is perhaps the easiest, especially if you're talking New Testament. Jesus talked a whole lot about work and labor and community. There is not a shortage of scriptures that we could use, Old or New Testament, to connect with the Labor Day holiday. And what I love about this weekend is it creates an opportunity to talk about the spiritual aspect of work, the spiritual nature of our labor, how we connect God to our everyday work life, whether that's paid jobs, volunteer, working from home, however it is, even those in retirement still work. How do we connect God with what we do each day, how we give of ourselves in service to the community? It's a great excuse to delve into the spiritual side of work. And as I said, there's no shortage of scripture, and I chose one today that might seem a bit unusual for Labor Day, but I have to admit it's one of my favorite of Jesus's parables. And I'm not sure if it's one of my favorite because it's one that creates the most tension and discomfort, perhaps more than any other of Jesus's parables. Folks hate this parable. It has been argued over for centuries. It challenges what we assume to be the way things should be, right and wrong, fair and unfair. It's a parable that you may have heard before from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 20. It goes like this. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into the vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock and saw others standing idle in the marketplace, he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. When he went out again about noon and about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And about 5 o'clock, he went out again and found still others standing around. And he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now, when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day in the scorching heat?" The landowner replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to the last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous?" I'll be honest, that last phrase is my favorite, but I'm not going to touch on it a whole lot, but I'm going to say it one more time. Are you envious because I am generous? It's a great question. It's a hard parable for some, and there's a traditional interpretation that's been around for centuries. For a lot of people, they just accept this traditional interpretation. It makes it easy, and you move on, and you don't really think about it a whole lot. It's not a bad interpretation. The traditional interpretation is that God is the landowner. The laborers are Christian believers who have come to Christ at different times in their life. As children, as teenagers, as adults, on the deathbed, we've all come into faith at different times in our life, and God as a landowner welcomes us in at whatever time and stage and age in our life we come into faith. Great interpretation. Really does allow people not to delve into their discomfort a whole lot. I'm not going to go with that interpretation today. Don't think about that one. I want to look at it from a whole different point of view. And parables are great with that because there are multiple interpretations for every parable that Jesus taught. So let's look at the parable one more time. He began with the words, "The kingdom of heaven is like." And there are many scholars who identify Jesus' kingdom of heaven not as an afterlife destination, not as something that we get to upon death, but rather as an attitude towards living. A way that we approach God, approach the world, a way that we create the world around us. The kingdom of heaven is available to us if we live into it, live into Jesus' teachings, live into a relationship with God, then we create the kingdom of heaven. It's here and now, and we're partly responsible to it and for it. So coming from that point of view, and still keeping the idea that God is the landowner, it's fun to think of God as that first laborer. He's the first one that went out. The landowner is the first one that went out that morning and went to find workers. But we know a lot of work has already been done. The vines are already growing, they've been pruned, they've been nurtured, they're full of fruit. They're now ready for more people to come in and be a part of it. Ready for participation, community. And the workers don't come seeking the job. The landowner goes out seeking them. God goes out seeking us, inviting us into community and relationship, not just once, but throughout the whole day. God is constantly seeking us, inviting us throughout our whole lives. And so then you have the first group of workers. God finds them, the landowner finds them in the morning. They're ready to work, and they make a deal. They sign the contract, it's all ready, they're going to work these certain amount of hours and they're going to get paid this amount. And they all go into it knowing what the contract is, what the deal is, what the payoff would be for the work they would give. They make a deal. I loved David's story about the kids get a donut if they behave in church. I've made that deal with my kids I don't know how many times. Usually it was if you sit still during this church meeting when they were young, because they sat through a lot of church meetings, then we go get ice cream after. We got a lot of ice cream after. They knew what to do to get what they wanted. They knew the deal. And I've actually known a number of folks who approach God this way. And it's a common Christian way of living into faith. We have an understanding of what the reward is, what the afterlife is, what the promised outcome is if we behave, believe, live a certain way. Motivated. Our behavior is motivated by the outcome. The focus is placed on what comes next, what comes after. It's almost like a contract or a deal. We'll do this if we get this. It's been a part of our Christian history, this understanding of why we live a certain way. But there's another group of people who do it a bit different. Actually, it's the next three groups in the parable, the 9 and the noon and the 3 o'clock people. They entered the vineyard not having made a deal, not having agreed upon a wage, not having set a contract before they went into the vineyard. They just went in with a sense of trust. It isn't quite said in the parable, but I almost get this idea that they were happy just to be invited. They were happy to have the work. They went in with gratitude, believing the landowner would treat them fairly and that they would have a purpose for their day. They arrived at different times and they weren't really concerned about what was going on with one another. They just simply wanted to be a part of something. This middle group, the laborers who came at 9 and noon and 3, they didn't grumble about what others received. They did their work. They focused on them and what it meant to be a part of this community. And I've known a number of people who've approached their faith in this way as well, not concerned with another person's or group's relationship with God, just focused on their own relationship, on how they live out their life, not because of an afterlife or a reward or a contract, but because they're focused, centered in what they think is right, based on relationship, based on their faith. They don't seem to judge the content of another's faith. The second group labored simply from a desire to connect. We live from the desire to connect with God and God's creation. And then this last group, the folks who came in, who had stood idle all day long until that final time when the landowner went out. And that answer to the question, why have you not worked all day? That simple answer of, no one has hired us. It's almost as if they're saying, no one wanted us. No one reached out to us. No one invited us. No one asked us to be a part of anything. They were waiting for the opportunity to be included. And they just weren't hearing an invitation for it. When I read this last group, I sometimes wonder how often I fall into this group, intentionally or unintentionally. How often we become like this 5 o'clock group without realizing it. We question our own worth. We feel we have nothing to contribute. How many opportunities are lost because we didn't think we could make a difference? Our participation would matter. And I wonder how many times have we missed God approaching us, inviting us, encouraging us to participate, and we didn't, for whatever reason, fear, not feeling like we had anything to offer, and so we remained idle, outside, not a part of things. And this parable points out that idleness, standing still, not participating, leaves us disengaged. Disengaged from God and disengaged from community. And yet God didn't give up. God still seeks us out. The landowner, even though the landowner may have had plenty of workers, still went out even till 5 o'clock and invited people in. And then Jesus finished this parable, as he often did. He finished it with a little bang that left you wondering. He described the all too human behavior of comparison and resentment. Comparison and resentment. The landowner's behavior was not what people expected, what people judged to be fair, and it is discomforting. And I think whenever we focus on comparison, we almost always fall short. There's always someone who's better at something, who's had different experience, who seems to have a life put together more than ours. When we start with comparison, it usually doesn't go very well. That's not what the landowner was about. It's not the question the landowner asked. The landowner wasn't focused on the wage. The landowner was focused on providing an opportunity, on providing a chance for all to participate. It wasn't about the payout. It was about the work. This first half of the parable is, I think, fairly easy to connect. It's not too controversial. God as a landowner is a pretty easy understanding. Throughout the day, God goes seeking people to bring them into the kingdom, to create space where all can participate in community, where all can be a part of something, no matter when people choose to come in. And God goes out not just once, but over and over, not just once in our life, but over and over. God is continually inviting us to participate. And even if we choose to be idle for a little while, we can still respond to that invitation and be a part of God's creation. There's not a lot of anxiety and tension there, but it's that last part of this parable that people have literally fought over, have argued over, have wanted to almost cut out of this parable. The landowner giving everyone the same amount no matter how many hours they worked. And that first group of people, that first group of workers who showed up probably about 6 a.m. in the morning and worked 12 hours and made the same amount of money as someone who stepped in for all of an hour and worked, you can kind of understand their grumbling. I worked for 12 hours, he worked for an hour, why are we getting the same amount? It does seem unfair, somehow seems unjust. It's not how we want Jesus to end the parable. But really the ending is that question, why should you be envious? Because I am generous. Why are you upset because of what someone else has received? Why is it about comparison? Why is the focus of your work the payout rather than the community and the participation and the invitation from God? If the focus of this parable is simply the wage, the payout, then it's easy to see why people struggle, and it's easy to kind of see why this parable gets ignored often. But I don't think that's the focus of this parable. I don't think that's the focus of what Jesus was trying to talk about. I think instead there's a different question, a question that's great on Labor Day Sunday. Why do we work? Why do we accept the invitation to be a part of community? Why do we spend hours giving of ourselves to a job, to a community, to the world? Is it just for the payout? For the wage? Do we claim faith only because of a hoped-for later reward? Do we participate in life only because of what we think we're going to get out of it later on? Or are we accepting God's invitation to participate in something that connects us beyond ourselves? Can we approach our labor, our work, as a response to God seeking us out and inviting us into life? Not just once, but throughout our entire lives. Are we recognizing through our work, whatever kind of work that may be, that it's an invitation by God to be a part of the creation? Why do we work? There's a poem I read every year on Labor Day weekend. I've read it for years, every year. It's a poem by Khalil Gibran in the book The Prophet. And he says this of work. Then a plowman said, "Speak to us of work." And he answered, saying, "You work that you may keep pace with the earth and the soul of the earth. For to be idle is to become a stranger unto the seasons, and to step out of life's procession that marches in majesty and proud submission towards the infinite. When you work, you are a flute through whose heart the whispering of the hours turns to music. Which of you would be a reed, dumb and silent, when all else sings together in unison? Always you have been told that work is a curse and labor a misfortune, but I say to you, that when you work, you fulfill a part of earth's furthest dream assigned to you when that dream was born. And in keeping yourself with labor, you are in truth loving life. And to love life through labor is to be intimate with life's inmost secret. You have been told also that life is darkness, and in your weariness you echo what was said by the weary. But I say that life is indeed darkness save when there is urge. And all urge is blind, save when there is knowledge, and all knowledge is vain, save when there is work. And all work is empty, save when there is love. And when you work with love, you bind yourself, to one another, and to God. And what is it to work with love? It is to weave cloth with threads drawn from your heart, even as if your beloved were to wear that cloth. It is to bind a house with affection, even as if your beloved were to dwell in that house. It is to sow seeds with tenderness and reap the harvest with joy, even as if your beloved were to eat the fruit. It is to charge all things that you fashion with a breath of your own spirit, and to know that all the blessed dead are standing about you and watching. Work is love made visible. Work is love made visible. On this Labor Day Sunday, I think the question is being asked, are we, in the way that we work, live into the community, offer who we are we making love visible? Are we taking time this weekend to celebrate the love made visible, not only through our work, but through the work of the community? Amen.